Good morning, everybody. My name is John Cornell, and I am the manager of the Genesys Cloud Developer Engagement Group. Today, I want to introduce you to two things. First, I want to introduce a new video series we're coming up with called Developer Drops. And the Developer Drops was really kind of created with the idea that we want to get content and stuff out to our Genesys Cloud developers, both internally and externally, as quick as possible. The goal of the developer drop video is to really be informal and have developers from developer engagement and throughout the rest of the organization just give very short 10 to 20 minute videos that are very consumable about our APIs and our tools. These videos are done by developers. They're going to be very lightly scripted. I promise there will be no PowerPoints here. But you'll also see that there will be times when we're working and we'll missay something or we'll type something wrong on the screen. So again, very informal, really meant to be from developers in Genesys Cloud to everybody else. So today's first developer drop is really something I'm very excited about. We're going to be introducing the new Genesys Cloud command line interface tool, or CLI. You're going to hear me refer to CLI all throughout this. Now, for those of you who haven't made a lot of use of a CLI before, you might be asking, why does this subject matter to me? Well, for me personally, I have spent a lot of my career not only writing code, but managing platforms and systems. That's been part of my day-to-day work. And what I've found is that administration work, especially if you're doing it regularly with any kind of platform, whether it's a set of Unix boxes, a cloud platform, a database platform, or whatever, you find yourself learning the CLI for that particular tool and using it to very quickly get a lot of ad hoc work done with or build scripts with it that let you carry out common tasks that would be very cumbersome to do with a user interface. I particularly find CLIs great for when I have to extract data for ad hoc queries out of my particular platform. And as a developer, I hate having to break my flow when I am working in an IDE and with the terminal window open, and then suddenly I have to stop because I have to look up a piece of data and I have to go to the web user interface to go and pull that data out and look it up. To me, that's a very disruptive thing, especially when I'm in flow. So what are we going to talk about today with the Genesys Cloud CLI? First of all, I'm not going to demonstrate how to set up credentials or anything like that. I will say that everything we do with the Genesys Cloud CLI is set up by OAuth client credential grants in your organization. And the only things you can do with it are really whatever privileges you give that OAuth client credential grant. But instead, I want to start with talking about the three philosophies that really went in behind our CLI, because it will help you understand it. It will help you get to use it more effectively very quickly. The first philosophy is we wanted something very small and that didn't have a lot of predefined notions of how users would use it. So when you start looking through some of the capabilities, you'll find that the CLI doesn't cover the entire Genesys Cloud platform yet. We thought it was important to try to identify the most important areas that developers and system administrators might need, but we didn't want to build a big clunky CLI that mirrored exactly our APIs, which can be multiple levels deep, but instead wanted to say, here's what we've got. We don't know how you're going to use it. Please give us feedback. I really want to see posts out in the developer forum. I really want to see questions on AHA or requests for features in AHA, because we really want to understand what you as a developer are looking for with the CLI. The second philosophy we went through is, as much as possible, we try to stay consistent with our Genesys Cloud public API. That means that all the data coming into the CLI and coming out is in a JSON format. The payloads for input and the payloads for output, as close as possible, mirror our public API. We did make some small modifications on our list commands for retrieving all of the user data or all of the data from a particular object to make it a little bit easier and consumable. But other than that, the data that you see coming back from the CLI and the data going into it are all going to mirror up with our public API. Our third philosophy is we wanted something that was very easily deployed and had minimal number of dependencies. So we chose to write our CLI in Golang, which allows us to produce a single binary that we've built that will be deployed available in Windows, Linux, and OS 10. And that means that basically you just have to pull it down off of our website and drop it into the path in your shell to be able to use it. You set up your user credentials and you're ready to go. So let's go ahead and start. I've already got an example out here with a terminal window open. My CLI is set up with OAuth credentials against one of my test orgs that I work with. And it's called gc.exe for Windows. So let's go out. We're going to go out here and we're just going to type in gc. Now, when we built the CLI, we tried to follow a very consistent pattern of noun and verb for our command structure. Some CLIs emphasize a verb and noun command. We did a noun and verb. Now, we have in here the majority of the nouns or objects that we would work with within Genesys Cloud. Campaigns, locations, phones, queues, sites, users, etc. Now, notice again that these nouns are not comprehensive. It doesn't cover everything in Genesys Cloud, nor do we have all the subcommands. We really want to start with a good 80% coverage here, and we really want to hear feedback from people. So you can at any time explore what you can do with these commands. So we're going to go look at the GC users command. Now, the other thing we try to do is we try to be very consistent with our nouns or our objects that we're working with. So in almost all cases, we have 5 commands. It's not every command, but we have 5 subcommands associated with each noun. Creating an object, deleting an object, getting an object, listing an object, and updating an object. Should seem pretty familiar. We stuck with very much the CRUD model that we have for create, read, update, and delete that we have for our REST API in our public API. So what I want to do is I want to walk through this a little bit. I'm going to walk through a couple of these commands. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can combine Genesys Cloud CLI commands with other tools to build out, to be able to query data, transform it into another format, or filter it and transform it into another format, which makes it a really, really powerful thing. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and type GC users list. This is going to go out and return a list of all my user objects within Genesys Cloud. Now, for those of us who are very familiar with our public API, you might notice something that seems a little bit inconsistent, because I just got done saying, hey, John, you said all of our JSON coming in and out was going to be the same. On all of our list commands, what normally happens with our API is we use a pagination model. So we go out and we return one page of data and we tell you exactly how many other pages are out there. And then as a developer using our API, you're responsible for making the calls, pulling it all back, and then also any associated rate limiting or error handling or anything like that. Well, with the CLI, because it's often used to query data, we didn't want to query data and transform it. We didn't want to force our users to have to do all that extra work. So with our list command, we actually pull the pagination data out. We do that all for you underneath the covers. And then also we enforce rate limiting on this. So if you're an org with a lot of data and a lot to pull back, if we get rate limited, we'll actually retry based on our rate limiting headers until we get all the data back. Because the last thing we wanted is for you to be rate limited as you were trying to pull data back and lose a bunch of the data that you were trying to get out there or pull back. So now, in addition to the list command, we can also pull back an individual record. Now, as anybody who's worked with our APIs with any amount of time knows that all of our objects and everything we do within Genesys Cloud are all keyed off of a globally unique identifier, a GUID. This allows us to guarantee uniqueness, particularly in a multi-tenant environment, of the particular object we're working with. It also prevents some of the problems that we see with sequential object creation and some of the security problems that you can see long-term with that, with people being able to guess, hey, if we haven't adequately locked this down, we're going to go out and just keep guessing until we get the sequence right. So with the GC users get, I'm going to pull back a specific record. I pull back William Adams. He comes back as just a single record. It comes back in a JSON format. Pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Now, what happens if we want to create or update a user or any object for that matter? we have two different mechanisms for taking that JSON content and getting it to our command line tool. The first mechanism is we take a redirection from or a pipe from standard in, and we then pass that data out to the Genesys Cloud or the GC CLI. That's very common, especially when you're working in a Unix, Linux environment or an OS 10 environment, where you're going to run your command and you're going to be piping it to other Unix commands or piping other Unix commands out there. The second option is that on any create or update command, you can pass a -f with a fully qualified file name and read the data out of it. So let's go ahead and create a user. Let's go ahead and look at the source file I've set up here for this create user command. And it's just a simple plain text file. There's nothing fancy about it. And the couple of things you'll notice is that one, on any create and update, the input that you get is going to mirror exactly what would be in a public API call for the same action. So in this case, we're creating a user. This is the minimal amount of information we have to pass into Genesys Cloud to create a user. So let's go ahead. I'm going to modify this a little bit because I've used this user before. And I'm going to say, Julie Isabel Washington is the name of my user. And I am going to say Isabel.Washington at 001 at Wayne Corp. I have a password that I'm setting by default. And I am going to use a cat command to actually go out and echo this. A cat command in the Unix environment just takes whatever file that you are passing into it and it echoes it out to standard out. So in this case, I'm going to go out and I am going to pipe this create user command to my JC users create command. And I have now created a user. The JSON that is created is actually what's going to be passed back from the public API call that we would have had to make that call directly ourselves in code. So this is really, really cool. It's a basic example, and we'll get into some more complicated stuff later on. Now, in the example of being able to go out and update, it's almost the exact same thing. I'm just going to show you the command. I'm not going to execute it right now. But here I'm catting a single record in a file and piping it over to the GC users update command, passing in the user ID. In this case, that user ID that was created would be here, and then I would execute it and it would update the record, returning the updated JSON from the user. Just keep in mind that right now we only read a single object from a single file, right? We don't support, we're looking at how we want to support this in the future, but currently with the CLI, we don't support having multiple records in a file. Now, some of the options we've looked at is being able to allow you to dump a bunch of files into a directory and then slurping them all in mass. Other options are to be able to pass in a command line parameter on the create and update command that says this is a group of files, break them apart and process them. But this is really something we want to hear from our users and also be a little bit careful about so that we get it right. So last thing, I can also do a delete command. All right, so I'm going to go delete Julie. Now, remember that Julie is, in Genesys Cloud, we don't do hard deletes. We do soft deletes. And so while we're deleting Julie, she's still there as a record. She's just in an inactive status and won't be returned in any of the queries that we might issue from this point forward. So I've deleted Julie. I've got back an empty JSON array. And now if I go out and I do a get again on Julie, I'm going to see that she is no longer being returned from our API and from our CLI. We got a 404 message back. This error message that we're getting back is the exact same error message that we would get back from our CLI when our public API when it's returning data. Get a 404 back. There's a JSON process with it. and we return it back. All right. So let's keep moving here. So remember from one of our earlier, the earlier discussion in the video, I really wanted to be able to go out and keep the CLI small and allow it to be combined with other tools. So I'm going to quick run through some examples of where I'm going to take output from our CLI and pass it to one of two different tools. The first tool will be JQ. JQ is a JSON processing tool that lets you transform a piece of JSON, filter it, query on it, and do all sorts of different actions with it. So let's say you've got a call from your HR department. And I know this is a little bit contrived, but they're like, hey, we want to get a list of all the users whose name is James. So what we can do is we can go out and we can issue a JQ command. Oop, got a little bit ahead of myself there in my cut and paste. I can issue a JC list users command, which will pipe to standard out, or I'll print a standard out, the JSON body. It will pipe it to JQ and apply a filter on it to say if the name in the return JSON equals James or contains the word James, then only return that record and then pass it back to JQ again so it can pretty print it and print the data out in a colorized format. Now we get this off to our HR department, and our HR department goes, hey, what the heck is this? I can't read this. This is all this gobbledygook. Can we just get the data, the ID, the name, and the state field in a CSV format so we can import it into Excel and do some work on our own? Well, again, we can take a tool like JQ and we can pipe this out. Same filter we applied before, but now we're going to pass in some additional JQ filters, asking to only return the .id, the .name, and the state, and then pipe it to a JQ command that will convert it into a CSV output. All right, that was a little bit unfortunate. Give me a minute. As I said, this is a live video, so I am going to go ahead and just grab my command again. I probably got an extra character in it, and I am going to issue it. And there we go. But look, I forgot to include the state in my CSV. Now we've included the state. You know, it's little stuff like this that can be a big time savings, particularly if you're an administrator or a developer that has to work in this type of environment. You have to get data, somebody asks for it, and they really are like, a lot of times I've been in this situation because I've worked within companies, IT organizations, consulting companies, where they're like, how long would it take for us to get a report like this? And you're like, yeah, it's going to take me at least 2 or 3 days to write the script to it, test it, and so on and so forth. A command line interface can mean you can get this done in minutes. All right. So here's just another example. I'm using another tool here. I'm using YQ, which is a YAML conversion tool, to get my JSON format and get it into a YAML format. So let's do a GC users get command. And in this case, I'm going to pipe it to YQ, and I'm going to send it out. And now all my records are returned in a YAML format. So again, this goes back to one of our 3 philosophies that we stated before. We want a small tool without any predefined notions of how it will be used. That's like our first philosophy. And because it's easily deployable and fast, which is our 3rd philosophy, it means that we can just drop it in and start using it with very little ceremony and very little overhead. So let's go through. I'm going to show you a couple other commands just to show you the kind of the art of the possible. And so I'm going to go out and I am going to create a queue. And what's interesting about this queue creation command is that I am going to echo it right from my command line, pipe the results over to the queue, and then pull the new ID of that queue out. So in this case, I've created a queue called chat 10. It's been created, and I will go out and have the ID for it. So I can go and reference it in other commands or in my code or whatever I need to do. I can also do this. I can create another one. I can do this all day. Now, a lot of times you might be asked to do stuff that, again, is kind of ad hoc. So what happens if you're asked to get all the users that belong to a queue? Well, I can sit there and I can actually kind of mix this up and use some Unix commands to basically get a list of all the users, find the queue that I'm interested in, pipe the ID over to a Unix XR command back to our GCQ users, and pull out all the users, queues users, and pull back all the users that belong to that queue. There's a lot of steps in here, and I'm going to honestly go with it. I hope this works. So let's go ahead and try this. Hey, it worked. Believe me, I don't mean to sound surprised, but like any developer, you're sometimes amazed that all this happens. So let's break this down a little bit again. Here we're getting a list of all of our queues. We're looking for the queue that is called chat2 via JQ. We're parsing out using JQ the ID, and then we're taking this xargs command and using it to pass the queue ID that we just pulled out to go and look up all the users for the queue and return that as a result, a list of users. All right, so again, this is just meant to give you a taste of what we can do with the tool. We're looking at, besides just releasing the Genesys Cloud CLI, we're going to be looking at starting a recipe book that gives a lot of these common recipes and things that people are doing with it, not only internally within our professional services and our systems engineering group, but also from other customers. Somebody finds something cool, we want to give them the ability to go out there and post it. So that's all I'm going to go through today. This is really, I'm a little longer than I would normally be on what I'm hoping with this developer drop. But just as a real short summary, remember, we're trying to start out small and expanding out. So if what you're looking for isn't there, let us know. We've got some processes in place that make it very quickly to stand up new commands. So we're definitely looking for feedback on this. Plus, we're looking at open sourcing this whole CLI and the tooling that we built to build the CLI out into GitHub, so that if you find a command out there that is very specific to your organization, or you need something that you really will make your life easier, you can go ahead and change it. Last thing is right now our CLI is in an internal beta right now between various members of our testing professional services team and our systems engineers. We're really looking to kind of get some of the early kinks worked out with the tool. We're looking at releasing this to customer beta probably sometime in the beginning of February. We obviously know that even with all the testing in the world, there will still be things that are found or rough edges where people are like, it would be better if you returned or did information this way. So we're kind of looking for that feedback. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate your time. I'm looking to hope to get a lot more of these developer drops out there, and looking forward to hearing feedback from everybody. Thanks again, and everybody have a great day.